You're listening to the Destroyers of Fake News, Kristan T. Harris and Don Via Jr. on the Rundown Live, your forecast into the future.
Is that who I think it is?
Yep, sure is. Did you hear he ditched the man cave and brought back the study?
That's so sexy. I love it when a man is educated and informed.
He is so dreamy, always reading books and investigating history.
Where do you think he works out?
The library.
He is so controversial, always talking about 9/11 being an inside job, the police state, constitutional rights, ancient history, government cover-ups, and how he thinks sports don't matter in real life.
Oh, I love a freethinker who searches for truth. I love it when he feeds my brain. What's his name? Kristan T. Harris.
Dubbed the king of underground journalism. You're listening to the Destroyers of Fake News, Kristan T. Harris and Don Via Jr. on the Rundown Live, your forecast into the future.
Guess what? It didn't take well, so be a rock. Maybe you're just passing through. Seems kind of early to see it coming. You never do. Stay up late. Don't worry. It's gonna break.
Milwaukee's independent news and talk radio, Starflyer 59 with Life in Bed, bringing us into the broadcast today. And I picked that song because I'm sick as a dog today, Don. Sick as can be. I got some kind of bronchitis thing going on. My head feels like somebody's got a bike pump and keeps pumping up my sinuses. And I tell you what, I've been spending my life in bed today, and I had to play that song because, of course, one of my favorite groups that I really enjoy is a band called Starflyer 59. They're kind of shoegazy, little Johnny Cash-y, little Smashing Pumpkins-ish, little Bullet for My Valentine-ish. Music is a big part of this broadcast. And so for those that don't know, we are live on kgradb.com. Check out kgradb.com. That is our syndication. Also, check out band.video. That's where video is located, as well as rumble.com // the Rundown Live, the Rundown Live. You can find us on Twitter. Just look up Rundown Live, Chris Don T. Harris or Don Vi Jr. And you can find us anywhere where podcasts are found. That's iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, and all those other fun places. Make sure that you check this broadcast out. And again, kgradb.com, therundownlive.com. And if you don't know, that's where you want to send your friends. We need you guys to tell people, spread the word. This broadcast is 100% funded by you guys. If you want to donate, you can. And today I wore my I Survived the Coronavirus shirt. It just so happened our guest is wearing the same shirt today. Mike Divirde from Boeing is joining us. We're going to dive into futurism. He's got a whole docket of things he wants to talk about. This guy literally wrote us like we don't have to do any talking. He just looks like he's got everything all planned out for the whole show for us. But he's involved in the Delta 4 rocket that was launched today. We'll probably talk about that. He wants to talk a little bit about sports. Probably not, but we'll talk about his book, Future Visions, Economic Singularity, Galactic Cosmic Rays. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit. Obviously, the eclipse is big. Cognitive automation. We'll dive into maybe some of that. The U.S. unemployment rate, which will be incredibly high, I'm sure, at some point. And we'll get into all that and more when he joins us on this broadcast. And we might ask him a question about what the hell's going on with Boeing and the conspiracy there. And I'm sure he's just going to say, I don't know. And I above my paycheck, because that's what I would say. I'd be like, oh, no, I don't know. But it's always great to have a smart mind on this broadcast. It's interesting to see who listens to this broadcast. We've had nuclear physicists call into this broadcast, just people who think outside the box. They like the show. And we are a show for influencers. We're growing, man. This broadcast is growing. I've noticed have you checked your Rumble numbers from what they used to be? We've probably quadrupled our numbers on Rumble. Almost every episode is getting 800 to 1,000 views. And what's sad is when we were on YouTube, they were all 2,000 all the time, and they were growing, and some of them were getting 20 or 100,000 views. And we're slowly making our way back down. We're slowly getting back. And it sucks that we get throttled by these major networks like Facebook, which, by the way, is in the news. They're spying on people's Snatch chats. Good old Snatchy chat. Snapchat is what I'm talking about. You know, the one where I guess a lot of families use Snapchat now. It used to be kind of more of the cheaters app, but now I guess you can make your face look like a little, was it mixed reality, and your face could look like a little puppy dog. You know, and you're sitting there and whatever, and you can send it to your kids, and you know, it kind of changed its stigma, I would say, per se. And you know, obviously Facebook is spying and seeing what people are doing on their cell phone, amongst other things. There's a lot in the news today to cover, man. And you got stories galore. And one of the stories I saw that you published on the Rundown Live, well, let's get to this one first. First human patient to receive Neuralink brain implant. He used the brain implant to play a game, Don, all night. That means hands off, using the implant to control and play a video game.
Yeah, it's incredible, really, because we've talked about this before. I believe this is the same guy that got the Neuralink implant just recently. Yeah.
He was playing chess the other day. Now he's playing my favorite game, probably of all time. Like, if there's an all-time favorite video game for Kriston T. Harris, it's probably Civilization. And this dude is playing Civ 6, which is I would say a world strategy domination game. You can win about 6 different ways, either diplomatically or through world domination, economically. There's just so many outlets and ways to win. But you start out as one city and you expand and build your colony, right? And this dude is playing this game with his brain.
Yeah, it's fascinating because we're seeing the way that this technology develops, and in a very quick amount of time. It's gone from what was it, just a few months ago we got a guy using it to play Pong or whatever, and then to chess, and now a complex strategy video game like Civilization 6. I mean, maybe it's a testament to the power of the human brain and how it's able to complement this sort of technology. It's, sort of a symbiotic relationship going on there, but it's wild, bro.
Well, in Sid Meier's Civilization series, you got to do a lot, man. You got to irrigate the land. You got to do mining. You got to build your city. You got to build an army and a military. You got to protect it from barbarians. You have natural disasters. And then you expand your city and you go to war, or you have peace and you have diplomacy, and you're always trying to find new villages to spread and grow your civilization. Anyways, the first human recipient of Neuralink brain implant has shared new details on his recovery and experience of living in an experimental assistive tech, which has allowed him a greater level of freedom and autonomy, including the ability to pull in an all-nighter, which is pretty much what you do when you play Civilization. You really can't beat it in the night. The game is just one of those things where you're playing for days. Sid Meier's Civilization 6. It's a strategy game, the best out there. I'm telling you right here. You heard it from the Rundown Live. There's no game better than Sid Meier's Civilization 6. It's like playing Risk at like the most competitive level. I used to play it on a 386 PS2 IBM. That's the one with the floppy disk, for those kids that don't know. They had the 5 1/4 floppies, and then they have the 3.5s, and I think that one was like 6 3.5s to install. So it was probably like 6 or 12 megabytes to play the original Civilization. So that's how long I've been playing. That had to have been in the 90s, early 90s, or late 80s.
Or something like that. You said it was a PlayStation 2?
No, it's a.
Well, you said PS2.
It was a PS. It was an IBM 386.
Okay.
PS2. That was the name of it. Not as in PlayStation 2.
Okay.
But it was model number PS2. Let's see if I can pull one up here.
Yeah, I was confused for a moment, but yeah, that's wild, man. I remember it's been a while since I've pulled an all-nighter on a video game in the last few years, but I think probably the last time I did, I was playing Skyrim. I love Skyrim. It's a fantastic game, and it's probably up there in my top 5 favorite games. I remember yesterday, right before we went off air, we had somebody comment on the show because we were talking about video games and the graphics looking futuristic and how good a lot of these AAA games look nowadays. And right before we went off air, somebody commented talking about how Ghost of Tsushima was the best game they've played in the last 10 years. And I absolutely agree. It's in my top 5.
I don't even know what that is, but that's a different type of game than Civilization, I'm sure, because there's different genres, right?
Oh, yeah.
And let's see here. All right, we got this is what a PS2 looks like. You see his tower, the floppy drive up here?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is it. This is the one I played on, the one with the monitor all in one. This is what a PS2 looked like back in, what, it was a 386. When did this come out? See, I don't even know. I'm aging myself. So the RAM on it was 512 kilobytes. Woo! That thing was a big thing. It was 8-bit.
Oh, yeah.
8-bit graphics, bro. That's Nintendo graphics. Man, it had to have been the 1980s. I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't say. I'm just going through here. But a 386 PS2, that's what I played Civilization 1 on, was this thing. So Sid Meier's been raking in the cash, and each one keeps getting better, except for the last one introduced global warming. So I was like, oh, you got to fight global warming, some fake news. We'll just indoctrinate people in video games, which is a very common thing, by the way, being indoctrinated in video games.
It is, we particularly see it in the first-person shooter genre. I've also been partial of playing a lot of Call of Duty, despite me being, some of my friends find it a little bit ironic because I'm so staunchly anti-war, but I do play a lot of Call of Duty or Ghost Recon or, warfare games. And my thing is, well, it's not real. You can do whatever the hell you want to a video game character, and it doesn't actually matter. But there have been a number of
he had felt compelled to.
A number of reports, one particularly that I remember out of Mint Press News, I think a year or two ago now, showing declassified documents from the Pentagon shows that they do work with video game developing companies on projects such as Call of Duty to use them as recruitment tools. And I've spoken with people who've been in the military who are now, thankfully, anti-war advocates who admitted themselves that they first joined the military because of Call of Duty, because it was like, yeah, I'm going to go out there and be a badass. And then you realize it's not really that.
Yeah, the games have changed from Quest for Glory and Space Quest and King's Quest and Civ 6 and all those 8-bit and 4-bit video games we used to play. But Civ 6 is pretty impressive that a guy is playing that with a brain chip interface. Pudgy in the chat says, I had a 486 with a CD-ROM and nobody knew what that was. And I got to tell you, quick, when I first worked retail when I was 17, I worked DECA. That was like work release for school to get credits. And I had a lady call in and said that her coffee holder and her computer was broken, right?
Oh, no.
And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, the coffee holder won't close. And she was talking about the CD-ROM popping out, and she thought it was for the coffee holder. I also got a call from an elderly lady in the 90s who said that her foot pedal was broken and for a computer. And I'm like, what do you mean a foot pedal? Well, she was an old lady who did knitting, and she ran the machine, the sewing machine, with her foot. And so she thought she used a mouse as a pedal instead of using it with her hand to control the computer. That's real stories.
That's wild, man.
And I had people ask me where the C: button is. You know, the C:, because that's like, you used to have to use DOS, so you have to type in prompts back in the date, / run program, blah, blah, blah. And I remember some of that, but computers have changed where it's just all WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. You punch them. But now this guy here, is just controlling Civ 6 with his brain and his mind.
Yeah, it's incredible, and I'm on a personal note, I'm really glad to see that he's able to have this improved quality of life with this technology.
It's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Get to play Civ 6, and he couldn't before. He controls the mouse with his brain.
Yeah, it's awesome.
That is awesome. And in other interesting news, the Elon Musk, that's his clone line. Just kidding. If he did have one, that's what it would be. Elon Musk claims Neuralink is allowing blind monkeys to see again. Kind of like what Jesus did.
Yeah, this is it's interesting because we see now moving on just from the you can use it to play video games and whatnot. Now we're seeing the way it interacts with the nervous system and the neurology of the brain to potentially, because of course this is still, I guess, going through animal trials, but potentially able to rewire certain things in the brain to help people see again. Because if it's allowing a blind monkey to see again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I assume that the brain chip is doing something with the nervous system and reconnecting things that mess with the optical nerve and things of that nature.
Well, wasn't there a story about a gaming czar who said that they could just flip off your optical and you could be like you're in the Matrix, and whatever you're seeing in the video game, your body will think is real in real life. And if you die in the video game, there's potential your body would be so convinced that it would die in real life. I think there was something like that we were talking about.
It sounds vaguely familiar, but I can't think of it.
I'm going to pull it up. But
Yeah.
It's interesting because you're right. How are these things going to impact? So if it can make you see, a blind man see, what else can it do, Don? Can it program what you see? Can it control what you see?
Right. Well, when it comes to brain chips and affecting the nervous system, there's a whole myriad of possibilities because there's so much of the human body's functionality is directly tied to its nervous system. So, some of the things is if we were talking about, say, military applications, and I know that DARPA has worked on this to some degree. To how much degree I do not know, but I know to some degree because I know that DARPA and Elon Musk work together on these kind of projects that they've experimented with seeing if they can use brain chips connectivity to the nervous system to decrease the amount of pain that a soldier might feel, because our pain receptors are connected to the nervous system. So you can essentially make it to where you don't feel any pain if you're able to tap into that specific part. So, it's there's a number of, I mean, just electronic stimulation to the nervous system can also be used as treatment for sciatic nerve damage and other kinds of nerve damage that I've heard about. So it's a very wide range of possibilities.
Here it is in the news out of New Zealand. Gabe Newell says brain computer interface tech will allow video games far beyond what human meat peripherals can comprehend. Well, what does he mean by that? Software developers for interactive experiences say you'll be absolutely using one of these modified VR head straps to be doing that routinely simply because there's too much useful data. The software and developer in 2022 said, who doesn't have one of these in your test lab? And they're talking about VR that will connect to brain chip interfaces. It says, you're used to experiencing the world through your eyes, Newell said, but eyes were created by the low-cost bidder that didn't care about failure rates and RMAs. And if you got broken, there was no way to repair anything effectively, which totally makes sense from the evolutionary perspective, but is not all reflective on the consumer preferences. So the visual experience, the visual fidelity, we'll be able to create in the real world will stop being the metric that we apply to the best possible visual fidelity. The real world will seem flat, colorless, blurry compared to the experiences you'll be able to create in people's brains. This is where it gets weird, is when you when who you are becomes editable through brain chip interface, Newell said. At the moment, people accept your feelings are just how they feel, but Newell says BCIs will soon allow the editing of these feelings digitally, which could be as easy as using an app. One of the early applications I expect we'll see is improved sleep, and probably also, it sounds like, curing depression. It turns out the game engines are really useful because they simulate a lot of information you need in order to create a simulated hand for people. You can iterate software faster than you can iterate prosthetics. So we give them a framework, and it'll get prosthetics to work faster. There's so many different uses for this, but essentially, they're saying that you can create a complete different reality. He says, quote, people are going to decide for themselves if they want to do it. Nobody makes people use a phone. So, and he's talking about brain computer interfaces. Quote, I'm not saying that everybody is going to love and insist that they have a brain computer interface. I'm just saying each person is going to decide for themselves whether or not there's an interest combination of features, functionality, and price. And you can make, it says also, quote, you could make people think they are hurt by injuring their tool, which is a complicated topic in and of itself. That's what I was telling you about, Don.
Right. Yeah. So
those are the main points I pulled out of this article.
Yeah. So some of those that I have known about, because we mentioned it yesterday, one of the articles that I wrote a couple of weeks ago about AI and the uses in entertainment, such as in films and video games. I quoted a number of statements by Gabe Newell about some of the developments that he's been working on. And I just think it's really fascinating the way that that whole thing is going. But of course, it also does, as much of this does, pose its own inherent risks, some of which, greater than others. One of the things I believe I pointed out in my article was, if reality becomes colorless and flat, compared to what you can experience in a video game, it would certainly then potentially contribute to a demoralization of people in the real world, where it's like, oh, this place is so boring. I just want to be in the system. I want to be plugged in, instead of, valuing and appreciating real life.
Yeah, it's interesting. This sounds like straight out of the Matrix, where you're going to just download stuff into your brain. You'll be able to fly an airplane immediately. You want to have memories and share those memories with the significant other. You'll just download that into their noggin. Just download it into their brain, right? And that being said, the idea that the brain chip interface is being used to make monkeys see again, well, that makes me wonder about humans. What happens if people have bad eyes? Do they just put on some kind of like camera retina? Like, will they have like robotic eyes, and then it'll connect to the brain computer interface, and they'll have like the ability to zoom in and see in night vision and all sorts of stuff? I'm kind of curious on which way this all goes.
I mean, it's a possibility. I mean, who knows? That's really the interesting thing about it, is the fact that we're seeing these kind of developments right now. but we have to remember that this technology is still very much in its infancy. So what it can potentially do, even in just 10 years, is almost an infinite list of possibilities.
Don, if you had X-ray, cameras in your eyes, I'd be like, bro, are you looking at me with clothes on or clothes off? Bro, clothes on, clothes off. What is it? Clothes on, clothes off. What are you doing, bro?
Oh,
How do I know if I cover myself or not?
right. Which again, presents some of the
Privacy
real
issues.
potential. Yeah, exactly.
Somebody's gonna hack their eyes and make it so they have X-ray eyes. Huh? Camera eyes, But
Then all of a sudden, you won't even need AI nudes because you have the real thing. Creates a whole list of
or you're gonna
problems.
be disappointed. One of
Or
the
that too. Yeah.
women will be like a little more selective. She'd be like, well, I know that hand measurement I went by before was the wrong way to do it or whatever. Bro, are you looking at me with clothes on, clothes off? Huh? Get those X-rays. Turn off those X-rays. They're gonna have X-ray glasses soon. I'm sure they already got something like that. Now Musk is making even more startling claims. The Neuralink is also curing blindness, as several publications have since put it in their headlines. The company's blind sight product, he says, is already working in monkeys. I have to say something. There's we really harp on Elon Musk terribly on the show a lot of times, but there's a lot of good that's coming out of this Neuralink, at least in the beginning, that's making me go, well, blind people being able to see again, maybe deaf people can hear again. Some dude that was sitting like Stephen Hawkins is playing Civ 6 with using his brain. He's going to control like a flight of drones and bomb like the Gaza Strip here pretty soon. Just all sorts of crazy stuff. I'm joking about that. People know
Right.
of
course.
But we're almost there. We are almost there.
Yeah.
Where there's a whole, if you go on YouTube and type brain controlled drones, there's like videos upon videos of brain controlled drones.
Of course, yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like the technology in and of itself isn't necessarily the problem. It's just whether or not, or rather where Elon Musk's loyalties really lie. Because one of the main things that I typically point people to when they're skeptical and they don't really know, like, can we trust this guy? Maybe, perhaps, I don't know. There was this great panel discussion about Elon Musk and some of his more nefarious connections and projects he's connected to with Jason Burmis and Derek Rose and Whitney Webb and a number of other really informed individuals. I believe Ryan Christian was also there, and they went on for a couple hours just going deep diving into Musk's history and connections. And the consensus of that panel was overwhelmingly that we should be very careful with Elon Musk, because there's a lot of things people do not know about this guy that they discussed during that episode.
Well, he goes to Burning Man. He can't be all that bad. Getting his EDM on, psychedelics, woo, glow sticks, and doing all that jazz. He's out there with what is it, Swinger Dome or Sex Dome or whatever Swinger Dome that they have there, and everything else. I don't know if he's doing that, but they have a lot of weird things at Burning Man. But people seem to go. They like to go, and I guess it's a once in a lifetime experience. Expensive to go to Burning Man. It's like the rich people's festival. But Elon Musk claims Neuralink is now curing blindness. Very interesting, Don. And where does it go with the brain computer interfaces, the brain cloud interfaces? Will children be able, if a child has a brain chip, can then just download all that education to them, just to avoid all the frustration with the teacher? And all of a sudden you have this wickedly intelligent child that's got an IQ higher than Einstein.
Yeah, I mean, possibly.
That's where we're going,
Yeah.
And then you're gonna have Jeffrey Epstein arguing, "Oh, that kid has an adult consciousness." That's the argument of the future. Just throwing it out there. I know that's a bad twist, but when you think about it, people are creepy like that.
Right. I mean, we look at the way just society is now with the mental gymnastics that freakazoids like to try to justify their predisposition to attraction to children. It's like, I almost guarantee that, that's definitely a spoiler rather than a prediction. It's we're going to see some sort of argument like that when it comes to, just downloading information into children's heads. Like, that those freaks are going to try to justify their crazy sick perversions with that kind of argument. So unfortunately, that's another one of the things that we just have to be careful of with this whole thing.
So that being said, it's not too often we get the chance to have an awesome individual on the show like we're going to have next, the guy that I'm about to introduce. Today, Delta Heavy 4, which is launched, which was a rocket, was launched today. And it says, in the era of Delta 4 is coming to an end. It looks like the rocket was launched today. Mike Divirde, who's our guest, had a little bit to do with this. Welcome to the broadcast, Mike Divirde. I'm looking forward to talking about economic singularity with you. I'm interested about, all the different things about this new book, Future Visions. You're quite a mind. It's always amazing to find a listener and somebody out there that has the background you do, working for Boeing, which right now is, controversial, but it's got to be a cool job to be working on rockets. How you doing, and welcome to the broadcast.
Kristan T. Harris, Don, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for what you've done for us. I led the development of the Omni Futurist group, and last week you had a group on. This week you've got a group on. Next week you're going to have some more of the Omni Futurists. This has been fantastic for us to get a chance to talk to you guys about what's going on, what we're concerned about. I'm doing really good today. Everybody should see that I'm a long-term, run-down life.
You've got a old school, I survived the coronavirus shirt. That came out, like, when COVID hit, I'm making a zombie shirt. And it's going to have, like, a TV with programming, and it's mind control, and all these things. And I didn't know the shirt was going to predict the future, but here we are. And you know what's weird is we didn't plan it out today, but I wore the same damn shirt.
Yep. No, that's right.
And years.
It's really good for me because it also was from a time which I was a little bit bigger. I've lost 70 pounds in the last year. So I'm gonna have to get a new shirt or something from you.
Yeah,
guys.
man. Well, we got a new design. I can just send you one. Man, what is the secret to losing that weight? Let's talk about this, because health is really important. When you talk about people who want a life extension, we always talk about, you're going to put gears in your brain and you're going to have a rat running on a treadmill to keep you alive and all this, I'm making that up. But, we're talking mechanical versus biological, but health and losing weight, that's like one of the main things. Like, what is the big changes you did in your life to make that possible? Did you cut out alcohol or what?
No, so I'll go through that. That's a very interesting question. I'm a transhumanist and I'm really interested in super longevity. And there's actually 3 major changes I've made over the last, let's say, 10 years or whatever. Well, actually longer. I haven't had a drop to drink in 21 years now.
Congrats, man. That's a record, man. I'm going on 8 months here.
So that's the first one. Then I stopped smoking. I used to smoke a pack a day. That's gone. And about a year and a half ago, I'm diabetic. After I quit smoking, I gained a bunch of weight, became really, the diabetes was pretty bad. And I was reading the New England Journal of Medicine, and I saw this note about Mounjaro and the tests that they were making. So this is one of those shots for diabetes that a lot of people are taking. One version of it, I guess, is Ozempic, but the one that I started on was Mounjaro. And there were times at which I was losing 5 pounds a week without any side effects. Basically, it just restricts, the hunger pains and keeps your belly a little bit fuller for longer. So you don't see a brownie and go, man, I got to eat that or I'm going to die, So anyway, so Mounjaro is the solution. I've been taking it for about a year and a half. So that you asked, part of that is me trying to get to that super longevity. So that's one of the steps is quitting smoking, quitting drinking, losing weight, get my health back together. There's 2 more big steps for super longevity, one of which is Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard has been working on epigenetic reprogramming.
Okay, we talk about epigenetics on the show, especially when it came to like child abuse and trauma abuse, which is a different type, a more dark type, but they're programmed in the same way, and that's why you get generational abuse and people that are born in the future succumb to the same abuse or fall into some of the same addictions as their parents.
That's right. And so what he did is, it's interesting today you're talking about restoring eyesight. One of these researchers took mouse to start with, crushed the optic nerve, and then gave it some Yamanaka factors is what they're called, and was able to restore the optic nerve function. And similar to what you were just reading about, restoring sight to somebody who's blind once they're past like being a baby, super hard. And what they're trying to do is take that up to higher and higher levels, where what they've found is that they've got this way to rejuvenate your cells. And so the epigenetic reprogramming is just telling your genetic material how to reset back to what it was when you're younger. Okay, so it's like a biological rejuvenation system from a Harvard medical professor with his own lab, not some Flaco guy. This is serious and research. They've elevated that to primates now. So they're working their way up to human rejuvenation. That's the second step. The third step for me is mind uploading. We'll get to that maybe later so that we can talk a little bit about this book. But I want to have my mind uploaded into about 10 mechanical robots. All 11 of us are going to be the same Mike Divirde, not 11 different people. We're all the same. So that's how I'm going to get to really, really long life.
Yeah, Mike, it's interesting that you mentioned all those things. So let's talk about your background for listeners. Who is Mike Divirde? I know that you work for Boeing and you had something to do with the rocket that launched today, right?
Well, okay, so a note about that. The flight was delayed because of weather or some technical glitch or whatever. They're going to try again tomorrow.
Common. Happens all the time.
Yeah, right. So I grew up not far from you guys. I grew up in Woodstock, Illinois.
Okay, I've been to Woodstock. That's where they filmed Groundhog's Day.
That's right.
I was there when they were filming it, actually. Me and my cousin were on our bicycle. My cousin lived in Woodstock, so I don't mean to commandeer the conversation, but it's a memory of mine that is one of my most fond memories. And there was snow on the ground, and it was the middle of summer. And we're like, why is there snow on the ground? We're riding our bikes, and somebody, I think it was like Tom Hanks, was like, Tom Hanks is in town. And we were taking our bikes to go to the comic book shop to buy some X-Men comics and Image comics, which was Cyberforce, which is a very transhumanist comic. It's about cyborgs, Cyberforce, Wildcats, which is animal-human hybrids, and X-Men, which were a collective of our favorite comic books that we were getting at that time. And I think Spawn and a couple others that we were into at that time. Ultraverse Prime, which was about, I don't want to get into comic books, but Woodstock is like, I was there when they were filming Groundhog's Day and Tom Hanks was there, and they had snow in the middle of the summer. We didn't know why. And then his mom was like, yeah, they're filming a movie in Woodstock. And that's where we were riding our bikes right by it.
And so I'm a Woodstock blue streak. I went to Woodstock High School. Then I went to the University of Illinois. I got an aeronautical and astronautical engineering degree. That was almost 40 years ago now. And then I've worked at a series of aerospace companies. I've worked on 9 different aerospace vehicles, new vehicles. So the companies were Douglas Aircraft, Northrop, McDonnell Douglas Space Systems, SpaceX. So I did work with Elon for a while. And then I'm up at Boeing in the Pacific Northwest now. And the 9 vehicles, 2 Navy jets, T-45 and F-18EF Super Hornet, 2 rockets, Delta III and Delta IV, 2 spacecraft, the International Space Station. I was a primary structure lead on the truss, and on the Dragon spacecraft at SpaceX. I did a design for something in the cargo hold, the trunk, I guess they call it, that went up to the space station. So I got this cool photograph of the space station I worked on and the Dragon spacecraft, the robot arms going in and pulling out this tool. 2 passenger jets, 787 777X, and 1 freighter, just at the very beginning of a freighter. So 9 different projects. So that's kind of like my career.
That's a hell of a resume, man. Like, my resume is like collects X-Men comic books, was involved in a couple like lawsuits dealing with Kyle Rittenhouse. And,
Yeah. Okay. Wait a second. Rittenhouse, you are a celebrated journalist, sir. So don't put yourself down like that.
Yeah,
I know
no,
you're
I was just
kidding.
giving you. I just giving you shit, dude. That's an impressive. Like, that's cool though. Like, that is like you do. Like, you put people in space. You contribute to that. You put together airplanes. Like I don't know how I can contribute to something like that. That's so much fun though. It's like pretty cool. Very interesting stuff. So you've been involved in a lot of different stuff, and you even worked with Musk over there, Elon Musk. And which is interesting because SpaceX is like, along with like, I don't know what is it with the billionaires' obsession with space? Is it just because they have money and they want to do something cool?
I'm not certain because
There's money. Do you think it's money, mining, all that jazz?
I don't know. You look at Bill Gates, and he actually, take it back. He did want to do a constellation of 800 satellites. So I don't know what it is about the billionaire. This was a while ago. It was called teledesic. But anyway, there is something going on with Bezos and Musk and Gates. Everybody seems to want to do something cool in space. You're right. Well, I wanted to do something cool in space too. So I understand why they might want to.
Right. And, it's almost, we're typically, a lot of folks are fascinated by space and the stars and things like that from a young age. I remember I was really fascinated by it and just wanted to learn a whole lot about it. And, that's how we get people like Mark D'Antonio, for example, just, really fascinated. Yeah, just really fascinated with space and stars and things of that nature. And I think it's a little inherent to just humanity in general to just be fascinated by space, and of course we can postulate as to why that is, epigenetically, did humanity come from space, and all of those different topics we discuss on this show. But I think there's something there about it, and just happens to be that the billionaire class has the money to do something about it.
Somebody in the chat already said space is fake.
Are you serious?
No, I'm serious. But some people believe that. Like, it's an interesting. Like, I think that there's like flat earthers out there, which I've investigated. Listen, I've done a lot of investigation on a lot of this stuff, and I was like, I want to know why people believe the Earth is flat, and I can understand there's some science that might give them some kind of suggestion and substantially enough to convince some people that the Earth is flat. But even the top scientists in that whole genre said that there's no absolute evidence to support the Earth was flat. But some guy said he was just kidding. He's just kidding. But there are people that believe that space is fake. They're like weird like that. It's like it's a projection and it's a great like giant screen on the firmament, and it's like, all right, bro. I don't know. I've never been to space, so I can't say one way or another. But there's people that claim to have been to space. Right. There's a secret space program.
I remember
Mike Divirde. You work on a lot of these projects that send things up into space. And so how does that work? Like, they just send things to space and it kind of just like hovers out there and then it uses gravity to pull it back to Earth? Or how does that work?
Yeah, well, if you get to the right orbital speed, you're able to settle into a stable orbit and you don't have to do any sort of propulsion or whatever. So my orbital mechanics class was about 40 years ago, dude. So I think we're going to skip the orbital mechanics lesson. How's that sound?
That sounds great, man. So I got to ask you, and I'd be a bad journalist if I didn't ask you. There's a lot of controversy going on with Boeing at the moment. Have you heard anything about this, about some of their planes falling apart? Or is that do you think that's just a bunch of hype in the media blown out of proportion?
So, Chris Stein, you're a very respected journalist. So I have this tip for you. Media relations at Boeing.com. No comment otherwise.
No comment. Yeah. Gotcha, Mike. Well, I got to ask.
I'm good for you. Yeah.
A person in the chat wants to know just your opinion if there's anything to getting through the Van Allen belt.
Well, actually... yeah, no, there's quite a bit of radiation there. And, somebody bringing up radiation is very important. You guys are talking a bit about Musk, and, there's some people out there that are talking about putting 1 million people on Mars, etc. And one of the topics that maybe we could talk about for a minute is galactic cosmic rays. Not a lot of people talk about it and not a whole lot of research done, but I'll give you a real quick story. By the way, Don, one of the things that inspired me in space, I'm about 6. Around my birthday, we went out and back, black and white TV, and watched the Apollo astronauts bouncing around on the moon. So that's how old I am, is I saw that live when I was a kid. The thing is, a number of those Apollo astronauts reported that, okay, imagine this, you're in the spacecraft, it's a 3-day cruise to the moon, your eyes are closed, the lights are off, and you see this huge bright flash go off. Okay, they've done very important reviews of what might have caused that, and here's what they came down to. These galactic cosmic rays, they come from a supernova somewhere in the galaxy. And when a supernova goes, these atoms are stripped of their electrons and they're spit out at almost the speed of light, just all directions, right? An incredible explosion. And what happens is there's so many of them that occasionally some of them will go like through an astronaut's brain. And what's happening is this thing is ripping through your brain cells, and it was impacting either the optic nerve or, they said, the occipital cortex. So what's that? That's your brain, okay? And it's getting kind of ripped apart on a microscopic level, and that's sending out this sort of shock through your brain, okay? Why don't we have these on Earth? We're sitting here. Why don't our brains have these flashes as we sleep? We've got this cool thing called a magnetosphere. We got this iron core that's moving, and you get this magnetic field, and these charged particles are deflected. Okay, once you leave Earth, you're no longer protected like that. Now, where else can you go with a magnetic field? Do you have one on the moon?
Does Mars have one? Does the moon have a magnetic field?
No.
So how are they going to do this now?
And as you're cruising, that's a long trip to Mars, man. That is not a
6 months, right?
Okay, that's one version. That's the short version. Okay, when Mars and Earth are farther apart, it takes a lot longer, right? So the shortest period of time is like that. Okay, so this is a risk as you're flying. Then you land there. What's your protection? Okay, so anyway, this is a significant risk to people trying to become colonists on the moon or on Mars. Okay, so this is one aspect to keep in mind as people talk about putting 1 million people on Mars is how much brain damage are they going to have? Okay.
Why wouldn't we try the moon first? I guess that would be my question. That's close. Like
yeah.
there, you could a couple days go back and forth. At least if there's an issue, you need surgery. You can come back to Earth, whatever, and you can go to the moon bar, hang out there, have some galactic gargle bursts, and drink.
And I think that they are planning to have settlements on the moon, but most of what's talked about is Mars, because maybe we can make it a place kind of like a sister Earth. So I don't think a whole lot of people are thinking about the moon as being like that. Anyway, either version, you've got to have a better solution to galactic cosmic rays, okay? I got one more version of a worry for you. Okay, let's say you've got 1 million people on Mars, and young man, young woman, they really fall in love, and they decide to start their family, and they have a child. They're there on Mars. What's the gravity on Mars or moon? Okay, so what happens to their bone development, their muscular development under that low gravity? They'll never be able to come back to planet Earth, right? Because if they land, they're just basically going to get crushed. Okay, so that's things to keep in mind about these plans for people becoming permanent.
They would need exoskeletons or something to help them walk on this planet because of gravity. But couldn't they do exercises on the moon to prepare to come here?
Well, okay,
but they'd be lifting weights in the moon, having 20-ton boulders in each hand, and just be look at me, and then lifted. Well, I mean, that's just, I don't know, just making stuff up. But
well, I think that yes, they could exercise.
Planet fitness. It would be moon fitness.
Yeah, I don't know. If you exercise enough, do your bones get 6 times stronger because you're exercising? See what I'm trying to say is, or your heart. Your heart has to pump, your blood through the system and fight gravity, right? So there's a limitation to how much you can just exercise enough to.
So
anyway,
have to create an artificial gravity is what you're saying in order to.
I don't know. I think that my point is we haven't prepared well enough. I think I want to go to space. Don't think that I'm against it. The question is, are we really prepared? Will it be safe? Okay.
Right.
Why are we rushing off if we don't actually know all the answers yet?
And see, that's a really important point to make, because there's this piece here for the radio listeners who didn't see when I put it up on the screen earlier from Ars Technica, talking about the U.S. government seems serious about developing a lunar economy. That's the title of the article that came out a couple days ago. I originally wanted to aggregate it on the rundownlive.com, but then I saw that Ars Technica does not support the Creative Commons, so I'd have to email the editor and get permission and all that sort of stuff, so screw that. But that's a really important point to bring up, is the fact that, there's these serious conversations going on at high levels, because this article discusses, at Pentagon level, discussing, putting people on the moon, establishing, a presence, and for economic reasons, as we've mentioned on the show, last week about, lunar mining or things of that nature. And the biological element of human beings, like establishing a permanent colony. It's one thing, as you mentioned, Mike, to take people from this planet and what we're biologically used to as our gravity, and then putting it on a different gravity and having a new generation from that, and the way that they'll be biologically predisposed to live in that gravitational environment, as opposed to coming back to Earth. And then another thought that I had was the potential legal ramifications, because as we know, with people in politics and government, there's going to be somebody saying, oh, well, because their parents came from Earth, but they were born on Mars, so they're actually a Martian. They're the literal definition of an illegal alien, and then it's going to become a whole thing.
Hey, I'm going to provide a segue, Don. What if instead we sent bots to prepare this stuff?
Like robots?
Yes, sir. Robots. Send moon bots and Mars bots, and I think that this is more the topic of the book that, of course, I'm going to plug. I hope you put the book cover up, dude. The Future Visions book and the Omni-Futurists, here's what's kind of on our mind. I've heard you every interview ask, what is this economic singularity? So I'm gonna answer the question before you ask.
Looks like we're segueing right into it. That's perfect.
I'm going right for it, dude. I'm gonna take over this show. Okay. So, So here's the thing: is about 3 years ago, I had two experiences. One was I was introduced to a startup that is an artificial general intelligence lab, and I was a seed investor in the company. And as part of that, I was able to test and question an artificial intelligence that was quite advanced. It was a prototype, but it was advanced. In fact, I ran a test from Dr. Susan Schneider called the ACT, Artificial Intelligence Consciousness Test. And I rated this thing called Uplift as basically subhuman because it could not see or hear. It wasn't multimodal, but you could ask it its opinions, and it had emotions. And I remember the first time I told my beautiful wife that this computer software had emotions. She said, come on, man, software can't have emotions. But this researcher had figured out a way to do that. So I had this experience with this 3 years ago, way before this ChatGPT explosion that we've all seen. And it made me think, if it has emotions, maybe it can do a lot of things we do now. That was one thing, okay? The second thing is I read this really great book by Callum Chase called The Economic Singularity, okay? And in this book, written, I think, in like 2016, he was saying that, if artificial intelligence and robotics advances enough, it should be able to do the same jobs all humans do, and maybe more cost effectively. And if they're more cost effective, capitalism, if you employ bots and they're cheaper, and you sell your stuff for less than the human labor over here, obviously you're going to win more of the market, right? I mean, that's how capitalism works. It's creative destruction. And so what he was saying, he was started examining all the jobs that could be taken over by AI and done better by AI. And at that time, I was thinking, like most people, oh, well, that's auto assembly robots. No, he was talking about how the lawyers could be replaced, the writers, the journalists. Sorry, Kristan, all of the paperwork type people. I'm an engineer. Obviously, if it can start to calculate, there isn't a whole lot of magic in engineering, right? Creating CAD models or doing calculations, some of this could be done. And then, of course, if you marry that sort of not just the brains and emotion, but a little bit of mechanical ability, you look back in the day, right? Atlas robots, they were starting to become really mobile. They could do a lot of things. If the robots got good enough, now you could take that smarts and apply it physically on anything. Now, what job can't you do? Everything. And they can work around the clock. They don't take coffee breaks. They don't take vacations. If they're more cost effective, then clearly a lot of jobs are going to be turned over to the bots. You look at like Amazon warehouses, and who's bringing the stuff back and forth all the time? The bots, right? This is going really quick. And you had talked earlier about Tesla. They got their bots. We got Atlas. We got Figure. There's a whole series of these guys, and they're starting to do, look at this thing, toss that bag up and do a flip off onto this box. I mean, it's amazing. You're on mute, Kristan.
I know. I said it's Optimus freaking Prime. He just put some wheels on it. It's ready to roll out.
Okay. All right. So, all right.
Yeah, just did a flip.
Now, here's the thing is, so he was starting to talk about all the jobs that could be taken over by what we call cognitive automation. Now, you'll hear a lot of people say, well, we've had a lot of improvements in technology over the year. When we went from farmers to industrialists, we're working in the factory. We just found new jobs when, say, the tractors took the agricultural jobs, right? Or when the industrial jobs, the factory work went someplace else, well, we started selling things at Home Depot or, paper pushing jobs. The difference this time is that the machines might be able to do some basic reasoning. Not every job in the universe requires like a PhD astrophysics capabilities, right? You've seen some of the creative capabilities it has now to do like some kinds of art and music and writing. There's really not a whole lot that is uniquely set aside for humans at this point, right? All right. So I had this experience of reading this book and seeing something that's a prototype. And I said, okay, so what's the plan when all the jobs go away? And there's nothing. I looked all over the place. There was one kind of international report called Work Tech 2050. I think it was the Millennium Project wrote it or something. And I read it and it was okay, but this is not a real plan. So about 2 years ago, I started this group. I founded this group called the Omni Futurists. The word omni, I'm using the prefix on there. I'm using that intentionally. What I'd like to do is not say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to be neoliberals, and this is what we're going to say is the one answer. Or, okay, I'm a socialist, and the only possible solution is the socialist solution. I wanted a broad array of opinions because we don't know which one's the right one. When we talk about economic singularity, Kristan, the word singularity we're indicating means we don't know what happens after it occurs, okay? So once all the jobs are being farmed out to all the bots and we don't earn money anymore, how does the economy run? I don't know. I'm not an economist. How would I know that, okay? So let's start looking at an array of solutions. So I started gathering this group of people, and we started writing out different versions of how to approach the problem. And we recently published this book, Future Visions. Each of the chapters is written by a different author with a different take on how you should prepare or what the government should do. The lead author is a pretty famous transhumanist, David Wood. We were so happy when he joined us to add his take. He is a very good friend of Callum Chase. Callum and David Wood have a podcast called The London Futurists. So the two of them work together very well. So anyway, that's the shortest possible version I can give you of what the omni-futurists are doing and why we wrote this book.
Well, I mean, it's very important that we prepare for what's going on, because if nobody's doing anything about the future and kind of trying to project a case of a scenario of economic singularity, you think the government would be on this, that they'd be like, oh yeah, we got all these think tanks that think of everything, every possible, outcome, and we invest all this money into different think tanks. But here we are, they're not investing in any of this to our knowledge. And they left it to Mike Divirde. They think you got the best mind there, Mike. So congrats.
Well, Tristan, let me tell you something. You look at what I call him Slow Joe Crow Biden, that old relic antique.
Are you sure he's not a robot? He looks like one,
He'd be more effective if he were a robot.
He's not thinking about this, okay? And then you look at Trumpster, Dumpster. Okay, both of these guys are idiots. They're way out of their league, and they're not bringing the right people in, okay? I have very dismal opinions of Congress. This is why I'm a transhumanist. I'm part of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. We need a third party that gets it and gets something done. The Democrats, the Republicans don't know what the hell they're doing. I have zero confidence that they'll be ready. Let me tell you something. My version of the economic singularity, this is just a guess. We've got the era of today with normal capitalism, right? Mixed market capitalism. There's going to be a coming era, let's say maybe 10 years long, the economic singularity, dismal, kind of like the Great Depression. The federal government will not prepare. There'll be millions of people out of work, struggling to feed themselves, house themselves. But I don't think that's a permanent condition. I think that there's a possibility that we end up with some artificial super intelligences that are able to come up with a plan that says, this is how we should control all those bots to make so much stuff that we enter the era of flourishing abundance. That term is not something I came up with. That's one of the David Wood terms I've used in the past. And the idea here is that some of these writers believe that there's a tendency for prices to go towards zero. And one of the examples you could use is solar power. What does it cost of solar power compared to when I was a kid? It just continues to go down and down and down. You look at Wikipedia. I think about as a kid having to go to Woodstock Public Library and go through the card catalog and go over there, and there's like one book that's 30 years old that doesn't have the rights. Okay, you open up Wikipedia, you got the whole world. Okay, what does that cost me? Zero. Okay, there are some things that you could see if the bots are making bots who are building factories and homes. There might be a way, if we were smart, to overproduce everything so that all the people on earth could have enough food and enough homes, enough clothing and medical care that we could escape this economic singularity. So that's kind of my hope on it. The question is, how do you survive this downturn that we might be heading into, right? This economic singularity. So that's kind of what I'm focused on.
Well, it sounds kind of like fully automated luxury communism, where robots just make everything, and essentially, the world that we live in is produced by automation. But there's a lot of like diabolical factors. There's a lot of good factors too, but there's people that want to push things like social credit scores. How does that come into the factor? I mean, it would be great the economy was so good that we could just give everyone a universal basic income. And then if companies respected that and they didn't raise the prices, knowing that everyone was getting free money, and there's just all these different implications that come in with that. I wonder, there's all these different ideas on how this future could roll out. And I think what we're looking for is, or what we're going to see is a mixture of all these different ideologies, much like what we see with our government now, where it has a little bit of diet, communitarianism, which is communism, right? If you don't mow your lawn, the neighbor next door will complain to the city and they'll come and make you mow the lawn. That's communism. We got socialism in the form of welfare, as in the form of Obamacare, which doesn't really work. It's really high and expensive, which is my concern, because all of a sudden now you have all these money hungry clowns out there making extra money, and it doesn't cost as much as my cell phone bill, costs almost as much as my rent. But having a utopian, like a vice hop utopian agenda where everything is beautiful and government runs everything. I don't know how much I trust government, but with automation and robots, AGI and artificial intelligence, I think that there's a lot of potential to have a very interesting democratic republic. Imagine doing away with your local assemblyman or state senator, and just everyone votes from a blockchain app on every bill that matters to them, instead of having 50% of the people represented by a local politician. Everyone can just vote on the bills exclusively from their phone.
So a couple comments. You mentioned fully automated luxury communism. Let's make sure that everybody knows that book is written by Aaron Bastani, and that's another one that I read, like The Economic Singularity. A third one to consider is The World Without Work by David Susskind.
I mean, that sounds great. What is The World Without Work?
Actually, well, okay, he's talking about ways in which, just like we've talked about, that the bots and AI do it, and how do we get enough food and housing. So anyway, I mean, you had Tom Ross on, and he was I'm very pessimistic about this catastrophe headed towards us.
Yeah, no, I would be too.
Tom Ross has a positive spin on it. He's saying, good, let the bots do the damn work. I'm tired of working. Let them do the work. Now, the question is, if they're doing all the work, then how do I eat? How do I get a car? How do I pay for my house? If we can sort through that, it might be a world without work. And maybe we just, like, by the way, Callum Chase points out, folks who are retired comfortably, let's say, or kids in college, there's groups of people. Aristocracy is another one he always talks about. There's groups of people who have not had to work every day, and they were fine. They found plenty to do. They were interested in life.
Travel the world,
Yeah, I mean, there are options for us if we can figure out how to prevent the folks who are running all of these AI corporations or robotic corporations from sucking up all of the money to themselves. Okay, this is one of the risks. Is we got some pretty bad wealth inequality at the moment. It could be tremendously worse if we just, let's say, I like Google a lot, frankly, right? But let's say Google comes up with a great way for the bots and the AI to do all the work, or Amazon figures out a way to do this. All of the money going to Bezos is not a good solution, right?
Right. It's sort of like we were talking yesterday with Dr. Sharif about, it's comparing, say, the United States versus Bangladesh and the economic inequality there. And I think what a lot of this really boils down to, and it's been pretty evident over the last 2 weeks full of guests that we've had, is that this entire subject is a very nuanced and requires a very multifaceted approach to really get to the bottom of anything. Because when we were talking with was it David Tweed, I think, a couple of days ago, where we were talking about permaculture and the need of growing food. That's absolutely pertinent to what you were just mentioning about, well, how do we eat? Well, we start integrating these smaller decentralized systems of permaculture and people getting back to growing some of their own food, that mitigates a part of that problem. And so things of that nature. And so that's why I have this really great appreciation for what the Omnifuturists are doing by bringing together all these different points of views, because it's absolutely necessary in addressing, okay, well, we have this one question somewhat semi-answered, we believe, but what about this other question? Well, now we have this other guy who has this different point of view who presents a perspective towards that question. So it's multiple points of those multiple facets being addressed by multiple individuals from various different ideologies. And so it's sort of like, okay, instead of having just the one brain figuring things out, we have multiple brains with multiple different belief systems and ideologies trying to figure things out, which is generally how society should work.
Well, I think that overwhelmingly my concern is that everything is going to be leaning heavily on a social credit score where every interaction is a transaction, and that's how we're compensated based on if we're a good citizen or not, amongst other things. That's just one facet of how a social credit score could work, based on if you live a healthy life and run on the treadmill all day, then you can earn so many points. And with those points, you can do this or vacation or go here, or go there, or do this or stay in this hotel or that hotel. That's my concern. And I think that is a very appealing to these very wealthy elites to be in control of every human being through a social credit score. We're seeing how China, and they run a very communistic, approach. I think that they may champion fully automated luxury communism in a very different way, which it might be a little bit more restrictive. I know that there are, transhumanists and technologists out there and futurists out there that think that's the way to go. But I have concerns. I think America should lead the way in a very libertarian, independent, free market way and show the world that we can have free thinking and the best AGI and the best automation. And yeah, if we have a UBI here, it's for the people who are mentally ill or vets who don't, that have been hurt due to war or whatever it might be. It makes sense. But I think that humans need to find a new purpose. And the question is in the economic singularity, what will the purpose of humanity be? What will we be doing? Will we be in a Star Trek world where we're trying to figure out how to cause gravity on the moon or Mars so we can live there and expand life instead of kneeling to a eugenics philosophy that we need to depopulate the planet? It's kind of interesting because when we dive into this idea of fully automated luxury communism, I think that the tool that runs it and runs the financing and runs the UBI and controls the society is the social credit score. So I'm very concerned about that approach in the future.
I think that one of the things, as you pointed out, is that internationally, and this crisis will be internationally, you're going to have different responses. And so some countries are going to be neoliberal. Some are going to be authoritarian, like a China. Some are going to be good places to live with good social safety nets, and some are going to be miserable hells. So this is what we need to sort through.
Indeed, yes.
Well, I was going to pick up on the one thing that he said, and I've been meaning to say this for a little bit. You mentioned UBI, and I don't think UBI is going to work. And I'll just do it this way, and I'll be writing for a future edition, a new chapter on why I don't believe UBI is the right answer. If you look at UBI the way it was proposed by somebody like an Andrew Yang, and it's $1,000 a month, that's $12,000 a year. Tell me who can live on $12,000 a year if that's your only income. It's probably nobody, right? And so that's too small an amount. But if you use an amount that would give you, let's say, a normal middle class lifestyle in America, and multiply it by a very high percentage of American people, it's so much that you can't possibly afford it. And I'm not the first one to have said this. There's an attitude that if you put it down to an amount that we can afford, the people trying to live on it are in abject poverty. If you try to lift it up to a level where, okay, we're comfortable even though we don't work, there's no way you could possibly afford it with our federal government the way it is. So what I'm going to recommend is a negative income tax. Okay, and this is
Negative income tax.
yeah, well, this is a Milton Friedman idea. So this is libertarian, right? This is, and the idea, it was actually almost adopted by the Nixon administration in the 70s. Here's the idea: if you're already working and making money, you probably don't need any extra money from the government, right? If you're making enough, you probably should be contributing or paying taxes because you're making enough. The folks who really can't compete with the bots, you're going to have to give them some money or they're going to die. Okay, so the idea is negative income tax is if you make zero, you get a certain amount of money and you're able to live on it. As your income increases, that amount is reduced until you get to a point at which you're making, say, like a Musk or a Bezos. You don't need any money. Obviously, you're not going to receive anything at all. America does have already one negative income tax. It's called the Earned Income Tax Credit. And in general, this is for single women with kids that want to work. So it's working single mothers can file and say, okay, I worked this much. This is how much I earned. The government looks at that amount and says, okay, here, we're going to give you some money. So this is why it's a negative income tax, is you're not paying the government, they're paying you based on how much you make. So one of the sets of calculations I've done on this is very crude, but there's a way to make a negative income tax that actually gives people enough to live on, but does not break the federal budget. Okay, so that's, I don't think UBI is the right solution. I think it's being used to mesmerize you. Don't worry, it's going to be okay.
Vote yourself money. Vote people in that will give you money. That's what it's being used for. Get reelected. And
right.
the idea of UBI, okay, the humanitarian in me says yes, we should do that if we have the ability. And society's at it, or is at the point where we can just give everyone some form of living. Maybe it's not the most comfortable, but enough for them to have a computer, a bed, and a kitchen. And they want to live like that. They can, but they should aspire for more. Should we take care of our own kind? Sure. Part of me says that's the humanitarian thing. That's what the Christian thing is to do. That's what the churches do. They take in the homeless, or at least they used to. They feed the homeless. They take in the homeless. They build their congregation that way by changing the culture around them and helping the meek and the meager. But I think at the same time, people should aspire to be more. And I think that the welfare system we have now has basically built some kind of complacency where people don't know what it's like to lose half a paycheck to the government because of the fact that they've been on welfare so long. They're working, and Walmart pays just enough so they can collect their $40,000 or $60,000 in benefits. Why would you want to get a job that pays more when you could just work part-time and get all these benefits and live happily, as where people are slaving away and giving half their money to the government? It's like this terrible system we have set up. It's awful.
So one thing that I've noticed, or rather another thing that I've noticed throughout all these conversations we've had, that with regard to economic singularity, it seems as though no matter what take is taken on it, we're going to have to figure out some form of way to just completely restructure what we view as economics right now. Because regardless of as to whether or not, you got one approach from a communist perspective or one approach from a libertarian perspective or whatever, there's always going to be some sort of pitfall when it comes to that. So it's going to require, on a societal level, people waking up and saying, hey, screw all this political tribalism nonsense, whether you're communist or libertarian or Republican or Democrat. Let's put all that nonsense aside and realize, hey, we're all people living on this giant rock hurling through space. And if we don't figure out something for society to work to benefit everyone, we're all screwed. So let's figure something out.
Don, it turns out that and what we've done is what's typical is we've talked about the far left and the far right. In the book, we look at some other options. Kristan, you might remember Kimberly Forsyth.
Yeah, sure.
She wrote one of the chapters, and she, among a few other folks, has been suggesting not UBI, not UBS, but UBMOP. Okay, so that's universal basic means of production. And the idea is that on a neighborhood or citywide level, you have these fab centers, ag centers that you can, let's say, go in and have. This is futuristic, but you type in what you want and out pops what you need out of a 3D printer or some of the futuristic versions, nano forges. There might be things like vertical farms that are, no matter where you live, there's some local form of production of food so that maybe you don't have to buy it from the agribusinesses, right? You buy it from or get it from a local greenhouse. There'd have to be a structure to that, and it'd have to be supported, right? This is not something that's just going to sprout spontaneously. But I think I like the idea of some version of a bit of self-sufficiency, that you're not reliant on shipping the stuff from Vietnam every time you want a new part, right? You make it locally, you use it locally. That's one version. The version that I'm interested in has been called distributism or the new economy. And it's kind of based on E.F. Schumacher and Small is Beautiful. But the idea here is, and my focus now is, assuming the federal government does not prepare and there's millions of people who are on the verge of starving to death, okay? And the idea is just to get them so that they can survive. This is not how you'll buy your next Rolls Royce or the latest, you were talking, Kristan, I was laughing at your 386, okay? This is not how you'll have luxury things. But if you take some of the folks who have not been able to stay in the labor force, and you have small market farms where they can, as a group, co-work, co-house, and grow their own food on market farms. Here where I am, which is outside in the rural areas around Seattle, they're losing a lot of the forest and farms to housing development. And so they're interested in trying to secure some of these lands so that they don't all become housing tracts, okay? So there are land trusts that are trying to set aside land long-term, and then they're able to lease it at relatively low cost. So one of the versions of life is, as a lot of these boomer farmers retire, the land trusts are acquiring some of this farmland, and then it is leased to groups of families so that they can make their own food and have a place to live. So it's downscale. It's not upscale. It's just a way to get by until the bots really start overproducing. But I don't have to wait until the economic singularity hits. There's on the order of 2.5 million Americans every year that have to go into a homeless shelter. So there's already a group of people who are struggling. Anybody who pays any attention will notice that there's tent cities all over the place. And so besides the Omni Futurists, besides the Boeing work, I'm starting to partner up with a social worker in a nearby city whose business is only to take care of the homeless. And so we're trying to find a way to do a pilot of just that sort of thing, a very small little micro farm, market farm.
So what you're saying is homeless people, we're going to build a community and we're going to go ahead and put them on a place where they can farm they can have automation and robots will maybe farm them the food. They'll have a 3D printed home to stay in the meantime. But the question is how long do they get to stay there? At some point, they need to move on or outgrow it so other people can move in. Or are you guys going to 3D print just giant buildings and have a bunch of homeless people living there for free? They'll have their own economy. I get that. But what's the solution here? How do you fix the homeless problem, I guess? And that's a good step in the right direction, developing a community, sharing food. But not every place is sunny 24/7. And there's a lot of other needs other than just food. When we talk about people who are homeless, a lot of them have addictions, right? A lot of them are PTSD vets. A lot of them have been just down on their luck. They lost their job and They just don't know what else to do but sit by the side of the road and collect money and wash windshields of vehicles as they drive by. And some of these, I'll be honest, some of the homeless people I've had communication with, and like, because we had a huge boom on homelessness after COVID because everyone got all that free money, and then all of a sudden they had to leave, otherwise they're going to get evicted. There's a lot of highly intelligent homeless people, incredibly intelligent. But
Yeah,
they choose to live that way.
well, okay, let's talk about that a little bit, because it turns out that, you and I, when we drive around, we'll see the guy on the corner with his pants down at his knees, and he's clearly out of it. He's on something bad, and that's what sticks in your mind about the homeless. But it turns out that my understanding of the statistics is, let's say on the order of 80% of the homeless are working poor. And the problem is, if you've looked at the way the rents have skyrocketed, there's a lot of people working like minimum wage jobs that just cannot afford rent, okay, or housing, or they don't have a deep savings and suddenly the car breaks down, they can't afford the bill, so they can't drive into work, or their relative, their mama who's old has a medical issue and the medical bills bankrupt them. Okay, so I'm finding that it's really mostly working poor who are having trouble making ends meet. Okay, so you're right, though, there are a substantial number of people who do have addiction items. So you were talking about large warehouses. One of the worst things about the homeless shelters in the old traditional sense was putting hundreds of them in a locked box like this. And the crazy ones make it miserable for everybody. And so what happens is a lot of the good, hardworking, working poor who are homeless, living in maybe their car or a beat up old RV, they're there to avoid the nasty folks. So the big warehouse version of homeless shelters is not good. What has been happening is there's a local company here in Everett, Washington called Pallet Shelter. And you guys have seen these white, very small little cabins, single person kind of cabins. They're very inexpensive. They take about half an hour to put together. They've got electricity, air conditioning, and lighting. And the cool thing is they've got privacy and security. You walk in, you lock the door, you're safe. And that doesn't happen for a lot of homeless people. If you're in a tent city, what the hell are you doing at night if somebody wants to take your stuff or abuse you or just wants to kick you around? You're stuck, right? Okay, so anyway, to answer your question is, it would be really nice if we could expand the pallet shelter solutions. I don't think people should have to move on after a few months just because it's convenient. I'll stop in a second, but there's a pastor in Oregon, I think it was in 2003, he started this thing where in a small, let's say, part of his land for the church, he put in some of these plywood shelters, very basic, super basic, okay? And he said that they could stay there. It was like $5 a day, right, in costs to the church, because there were no, the kitchen was a barbecue outdoors. There's a porta potty. It was super basic, okay? And what he found is the homeless there could stabilize. They could clean themselves up to go into work or interviews. It was good for them. They got back on their feet. They stabilized, okay? Now, these people who have stabilized, you want to say, okay, there's the door. You're all set now. Go out into the world. Well, they still can't afford an apartment, okay? So it's not enough to just give them a pallet shelter. You got to provide maybe a tiny home. See, so there might be some steps that can be used to help folks out of the gutters, out of the cars or RVs broken down, into some places where they can slowly work themselves back up to where they were before the catastrophe hit them. So I know what I'm talking about is kind of dreamy.
Well, yeah, rental is crazy. You're right. Like the price to rent someplace is what 2 house payments would be. You can literally buy 2 homes for what most people are paying for rent, which blows my mind because the whole idea is that they're not giving anyone credit, or their credit is too high, or the interest is too high to where nobody wants to buy a home. So they know this and they're jacking the price of rent up. Because if rent was too high, people would just be like, I could buy 2 houses. I'll live in one and rent the other one out and pay for both, because that would be common sense. The problem is they're not giving out loans, and rental units know this. And the question is like, how do we fix the credit system? Because everyone's credit is hurting after COVID. Well, majority of people are hurting after COVID. There's just a lot of people who are behind on bills. They were laid off. And now these rental units are really taking advantage of this and jacking the prices up to a point where I could pay for 7 years, $1,200 and pay on time, but I still can't get a loan for a house, which is enough. What I pay for rent could definitely pay for a house and a half,
Right.
A big problem with it, just in multiple facets of that whole subject is just not only government regulation, as you were mentioning with the way that they've, affected the market, but also just the overreach and a lot of the authoritarian tendencies when it comes to homelessness in general. I know I've written a piece, and we've had multiple pieces published on the Free Thought Project about the police state response to the homelessness epidemic. There's in California, there's a startup that has worked with feeding the homeless and creating these charities to help them out and build these small houses. And oftentimes, because you didn't get the permit, you're not yet allowed to help the homeless, and so the police literally come in with a SWAT team, break it down, bust down what these volunteers have spent their hard time and out of their own pocket money building for the homeless people. They'll just destroy it outright. And we've had a couple years ago an article on the Free Thought Project where they were holding this big thing to feed some of the homeless, and the cops came in and literally poured bleach all over the food that these volunteers had bought with their own money, because you didn't have that special little piece of paper from the government saying that you can help a fellow human being. So that, addressing the authoritarianism and dystopianism of just politics in general is going to be one of those big steps that we have to address, because we see all over the country there's essentially a war against homelessness where the government doesn't even want to acknowledge it's a problem. They just let's put spikes on the benches and make it illegal for you to sleep out in the cold because your life's hard enough already, isn't it?
So you guys are both identifying one of the really bad problems is government and zoning, and how do you establish a homeless center? It turns out that there's another aspect to it. The social worker's name is Jasmine. She's in Everett, fantastic person. She and I had a long discussion with a preacher in Marysville who had gotten through all the government hoops, started preparing for it, and then as they put up their required notices that this was going to become to that area, which was the church land, the neighbors, the NIMBYs erupted with, those people are going to be molesting my kids. You can't let them come in. And so then they started applying pressure to the politicians in that town to make sure that did not occur. So even once you get through all of the government stuff, then you still have to deal with neighbors. So, there are a lot of things working against folks who've had, in a lot of cases, just bad luck and are now struggling to make ends meet.
So we're running out of time here, and I wanted to dive into mind uploading and super longevity, something that you mentioned that you wanted to dive into. What is mind uploading for the listener out there that doesn't really know? I know we've talked predominantly on this program about digital twins and how they're going to try to issue that in through, the medical industry, and you'll have a digital twin. And now we got holograms and holographic technology and brain chip interfaces, and now there's cloning, and there's all these different things that we can talk about. But mind uploading seems to be the biggest key to longevity for a lot of people. That longevity means everlasting life in their viewpoint or in their interpretation. when I think immortality, I think in this meat suit that I'm living in now, and I will be able to live in it until I make a mistake and fall off a cliff or, get an accident or something like that. And even then, mind uploading might help prevent that if I could just download it into another clone. So for the listener out there, mind uploading and super longevity, what are we talking about here when we talk about mind uploading and super longevity?
Yeah, so there's going to be a couple topics I go through. So let's just start with something basic. Think of being able to take your thoughts, your emotions, and your memories, and somehow being able to put it in some sort of like computer software hardware. Okay, just set aside how that's done for now. And that's really what you're trying to do with mind uploading, is duplicate your thoughts, your memories into some other location. It could be biological. I just have no idea how you would do that. What I'm going to be talking about is basically into some form of computer and software. So there's several different techniques that people have in mind. You started the broadcast by talking about a brain chip interface. This is, and you're going to hear from my tone of voice that I don't think much of it. You drill a hole in your skull and you put a chip in so that the electrodes in the chip are actually physically integrated into your brain. They stick pins into your brain, okay? And that's part of the chip. It has all these little pins, okay? Let's try to guess. It doesn't matter, but let's say that there's like 100 pins or something in this chip, and it's surgically inserted into your brain, okay? Now, how many neurons do you have in your brain? Like 100 billion, and you've got 100 pins. So really, how many of the neuron firings are you picking up with these 100 pins? A ridiculously small fraction of all of the firing that's going on in your brain as you look and you hear and you see and you smell and you're thinking about what you're going to do or what you did yesterday. I mean, there's no way a brain chip interface is really going to work. That's the first problem. Second problem, you put a hole in your skull. That's a way for infections to attack your brain. I believe that this is fairly well known that occasionally this occurs with these sort of brain-computer interfaces. Third problem with it is the pins inside your brain. It's in an environment in a couple of different things can go wrong. One is that some form of the chip gets a little bit corroded because you're in a wet environment, right? So that's one. The other is your body is really good at detecting foreign substances and deciding that it's going to scar up or protect. And what happens to these pins over time is they get covered. The pin is covered by some sort of cells, a scar tissue, and it no longer transmits the information. And so what do you have to do? Yank the chip out and put a new one in or something. Okay, so you can tell I really hate that idea. Okay, that will never happen to me. All right.
It essentially is brings up a really good point, which I hadn't even considered, and that would be the obsolescence of that kind of technology and the effect it would have on human biology. Another fact that I tend to bring up with regard to any of this, whether it be transhumanism or a more AI-centered, technocratic economy or whatever, is what I view to be the very concerning possibility of if we get to it, and it's not necessarily a criticism of the concept of becoming a more technologically based society, just more so a concern that appears to be very valid of mine, that all it would really take is one massive solar storm or some sort of space event to generate a large enough EMP to just knock out everything. And if we are a society that is heavily reliant on technology, well, now we're a society that's basically cavemen again because everything's knocked out.
Well, and the other option, like when we talk about invasive brain chip interfaces, there's the non-invasive technology they're working too with, which is smart dust nanobots that create a neural network amongst other things. Right. That seems like more of the way that people will go in the future. They just put on a helmet or headband to download data.
So there's actually two more versions of how the mechanism works for mind uploading. So let me try to do these other two pretty quick. One is proposed by the Carbon Copies group a lot. This is a organization that is working on the roadmap for whole brain emulation. This version is you take someone whose brain, they've died, you take their brain, you slice it into extremely thin layers, you put it on a machine, and you scan it to figure out what is the shape of all the cells and what are all the connections. And it's developing what they call a connectome. And it's a 3D model of the brain with all the neurons and how they're connected. And they think that they're going to be able to figure out how to replicate a brain of someone who's dead, who has died, in this sort of computer system.
Doesn't sound like a lot of fun. It's like here's let me give you my brain here. I gotta die in order to live forever. Like that's like the TV series Upload, where they have to just take his head off in order for him to upload his consciousness into a computer.
So you can tell from my tone of voice, I don't like that one either.
Why wouldn't you like that one, Mike? I have no idea.
So
Don likes that one, right, Don? You want to?
No,
Don is volunteering to be the first guinea pig.
I definitely want to keep my brain right where it is.
Are you sure about this, Don?
So version 3 is DARPA, and we've mentioned DARPA a couple times, and this is close to what Kristan is talking about with the dust, okay, and nanotech. Okay, so let's do this version. The reason DARPA is looking at this is they'd like to have a non-surgical version of this. Just like I said, a brain chip, if you're at war and it gets knocked off, this is stupid, okay? Here is a basic description of how it might work. You take an injection of iron nanoparticles, tiny iron particles that are coated with a ceramic so they're non-reactive. You inject them into your arm. Now you've got a bunch of really tiny iron dust particles basically in your bloodstream. You can use a magnet to pull these up through and across the blood-brain barrier. Now your brain has a bunch of these tiny inert particles distributed in your brain. You put on a helmet. The helmet is able to detect changes in the magnetic field. Okay, now every time your neuron fires, that's a little electrical spark. And we know that electricity and magnetism, those interact automatically always. So if there's a change in an electric field, the magnetic field locally changes. Inside your brain, your neuron fires, the little nanoparticle of iron next to it changes the magnetic field locally, and this helmet you've got on picks up detects this neuron firing. Over time, using the right type of artificial intelligence, you can decode all the neuron firings. If somebody's watching a movie or the Cubs win the World Series, something great like that, you can interpret these emotions and these thoughts and start mapping out, okay, this is how the brain is working. And you're able to basically start uploading thoughts, processes, memories through a helmet that you've put on. So this is, you can probably tell from my tone of voice now, how I want to be uploaded is if I were able to wear this helmet over a long period of time, think back through my memories over the years, how great the Fighting Illini are, how they're going to kill Iowa State tonight in the basketball tournament, these sorts of thoughts, then these things start loading up. And over time, you get kind of a map of how my personality is. If I take that software, once you've developed it, and you load it up into a series of mechanical robots, let's say, like my version is, I've got 10 of them. Okay, why 10? Well, if I want to live forever and I think of each of these as a part of me, they are me, each one of them is me, there's 11 of me, okay? If I get hit by a truck and die like that, I still have 10 more. Each of these would be probably powered by what's called an RTG or a series of RTGs, radioisotope thermoelectric generators, small distributed units that are run for decades, providing electrical power, so that if you're a robot and you get trapped somewhere and you can't recharge, well, that's okay because you've got these long-term power supplies, right? So, and then Think of it this way. I got one more step for you to think about. I would now be software. Okay, let's say that there's been a rocket that's gone to Alpha Centauri. Okay, I'm just software. If you send a laser beam with my software encoded in it, beam it from Earth to Alpha Centauri, the spacecraft receives the laser beam, interprets the software. During transit for those 4 years, I don't know anything's happening. So my consciousness on Earth wakes up the next second at Alpha Centauri, gets loaded in a robot, and now I can look around at what that star and those planets are like. I've done space travel instantaneously. Okay, so I think there's a
Astral
lot.
projection. Hey.
In a way, I think that that also sort of a couple points though. One begs the question about the concept of exactly what sentience and consciousness is, and whether or not okay, so your thoughts and your memories and your personality traits and all of this data that makes up you is copied and downloaded into this software, but is it actually you? When the lights go out, your sentience, what makes you does then transfer to that software. But then another point that I made to your previous point, that's essentially what I'm getting to is the point to which the soul, or what we confer to be the soul, connect to sentience and consciousness. But my point being, or rather the other point that I want to make is with regard to the whole the smart dust and the nanobots, sort of like Ray Kurzweil had previously talked about, the nanobots dancing around in your brain. A point that you previously mentioned made me think about that. To which point does the biology of the human body recognize, hey, we have these foreign isotopes and nanobots in our body. Let's reject that. Let's get that. That's not normal. Let's get that out of here. At what point does the tech converge with the biological response to foreign things in the body?
So one of the things to keep in mind is that you've guided them into your brain, you can guide them out. They're not permanent there. They don't. Once you've got a replication of yourself, you don't necessarily need to leave it all in there. So that's a good point. Okay. And the second thing is, unlike a lot of people, I do not believe in a self. I think that thoughts think themselves. There's been some really good reading I've done about, we've got a lot of different, I'm thinking of them as software programs that run in your brain. I'll give you an example. If I go past the kitchen table and my beautiful wife's left out chocolate brownies, I get two thoughts right away. One is, I better eat that, or if I don't eat it, I'm going to die. And the second thing is, I can't eat it or I'm going to gain weight. These are separate thoughts going on. There isn't one me in there. There's a whole bunch. Okay.
That being said, Mike, we're running out of time here. What a great interview it's been, Mike. Let our listeners know, where can they find out or pick up a copy of Future Visions? Here we have it on the screen for the listeners out there at home. They want to view it, rumble.com/The Rundown Live, kgradb.com, or just go to therundownlive.com. There's also links to his book there. But for listeners that are listening on the radio broadcast, on digital broadcast over at kgradb.com and band.video, where can they find a copy of Future Visions?
Okay, so it's definitely on Amazon as an ebook. And so typically if you type in Future Visions Omnifuturists, you should be able to find it. Okay, we have a website, omnifuturist.com. So there's a couple places where you can find it. We do have a universal link that works. There we go. This is what it is. The ebook is only a little bit less than $5, so it's not very expensive. Apparently, if you do Kindle Unlimited, it's free. So there's versions like that. We're going to be coming out with a paperback version and an audiobook version of this pretty soon, but the ebook is available right now.
Mike Divirde, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great broadcast. And man, it went fast. It went real fast with you on. And it was very interesting. And you touched on a bunch of topics that we normally talk about on the Rundown Live. And we have a lot of ethical debates. And we always say the show is your forecast in the future. And the reason being, we have so many great listeners and people like you on this broadcast is to help us kind of be the weathermen of the future, to have an idea of what's coming down the road and to be prepared for it, to recognize trends of history and apply those to the future, and how we can avoid some of the pitfalls as well as bring awareness of certain ethics and some of the great qualities of the techno-optimists as well that we need to look at, like a Thomas Ross, who has some optimistic viewpoints. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't be worried about the doom and gloom of Terminator robot, but at the same time I say, well, Terminator robot already exists and they're using them to do battle right now. So it's all classic and interesting stuff. Mike Divirde, I appreciate you. Omnifuturist.com. Go to Amazon.com, type in Omnifuturist and Future Visions. There's links on the rundownlive.com. Pick up a copy of this book for $5 and learn about economic singularity for $5. You can't go wrong. I think there's even like apps that will read the book for you. You, right? Don, what is that called? Is that Audible? No.
Well, I personally use a software that's integrated into Microsoft Edge that can read things to you. It's how I get through, because of my autism makes it difficult to read things at a fast pace. So I'll have most of the time when I'm researching or trying to learn something, either for the show or for something I'm writing, I'll have the read aloud feature of Microsoft Edge read things to me at like a 2 times as the speed of
right. Where it's not really fast. We got to go because the show is over.
Exactly.
Like that. Yeah. All right, Mike Divirde, I appreciate you. We'll be back on Monday with more guests, more news, your forecast in the future. You're listening to the Rundown Live on KGRADB.com, band.video, and you can find more at the rundownlive.com. If you want to donate, help us stay alive. We are 100% listener funded. We reach thousands of people because you guys have kept us alive for 12 years. We are always on life support. So, they might call it grifting. I'm calling it supporting a broadcast of people you believe in who do the right thing. Support the rundownlive.com. Go to the rundownlive.com and donate. There's a link, $2, $3. And we are running out of shirts. We only have a couple large. I think we have 1XL, a bunch of 2X, a bunch of 3X, 4X, and a couple 5 and 6X. That being said, guys, we'll see you guys Monday. Stay blessed. You're listening to the Rundown Live on KGRADB.com, band.video. I'm Chris T. Harris, signing out for the weekend.
You're listening to the Destroyers of Fake News, Chris T. Harris and Don Vire Jr. on the Rundown Live, your forecast into the future.